Welcome back to the things that bother me. If you've been here through this series, then you already know this wasn't built to entertain you. This was built to call things out exactly as they are. No spin. No softening. Just reality laid out piece by piece. And if this is your first time here, this isn't the episode to watch halfway. This is the one where everything comes together. This is episode 8. The final episode in the Generation X series. An uncertain future. Up to this point, we've been breaking it down step by step. We started with the idea that you could be anything, and showed where that started to crack. We looked at what it meant to grow up independent, sometimes too early. We watched the ladder disappear while you were still climbing it. We exposed the gamble behind college. We hit the pressure of being squeezed from both sides. We showed the safety net thinning out, strand by strand. Each episode wasn't separate. It was building. And now we're here. This is where all of it connects. Not just what happened, but where it leads. Because this episode isn't about the past. It's about what happens next. What happens when jobs don't come back? What happens when support becomes conditional? What happens when healthcare becomes a risk instead of protection? What happens when retirement stops being real? And the hardest one, what happens when there's nothing left underneath you to catch the fall? This isn't a theory. This isn't exaggerated. This is the direction things are already moving. So if you've watched the series, this is the payoff. And if you haven't, you're about to see the full picture anyway. This is Generation X, an uncertain future. The final episode. Let's get into it. Generation X, Episode 8, An Uncertain Future. When nothing catches you. The slow collapse was the warning. It didn't start with chaos. It started with small things people ignored. Job postings getting thinner. Benefits getting harder to qualify for. Costs rising faster than anyone could realistically keep up with. At first, it felt manageable, tight, but manageable. People got used to it. Cut back. Worked more. Took on extra roles. That's what Generation X has always done. Get used to it. But there are limits to what you can just get used to. And what no one wanted to admit, what no one said out loud, is that all those small shifts weren't temporary. They were pressure building inside a system that was already strained. Every cut, every restriction, every increase. It stacked. Until the system didn't bend anymore. It gave. And when it gave, it didn't collapse cleanly. It fractured. Uneven. Unpredictable. One part holding while another failed. One group stable while another dropped. No pattern. No warning. No consistency. And Generation X, right in the middle of life, with the least room to absorb shock, took it directly. 1. The job market doesn't collapse, it disappears. This isn't a recession. This isn't layoffs followed by recovery. This is absence. Positions don't come back. Entire categories of work fade out quietly. Automation finishes what outsourcing started. AI strips down roles into fragments. What used to be one stable job becomes 5 unstable tasks spread across platforms. You don't lose your job, you lose the type of job that sustained your life. And when you go looking for something else, you realize something worse. There's nothing equivalent left. You scroll listings not because you expect results, but because stopping feels like giving up. You apply to positions you're overqualified for, underqualified for, and completely mismatched for, because the middle ground is gone. And after enough time, the question changes. Not where do I fit? But is there anywhere left to fit at all? 2. The safety net tightens until it snaps. At first, the rules just get stricter. More documentation. More verification. More conditions tied to assistance that used to be automatic. You comply. You submit forms. You follow the process. Then one day, you don't qualify. Not because you don't need help, Because you don't meet the structure of how help is distributed. Wrong hours. Wrong classification. Wrong timing. Wrong system. And just like that, support is gone. No SNAP. No Medicaid. No buffer between you and collapse. You try to appeal. You call. You wait. You explain. But the system isn't designed to adapt to your situation. It's designed to process you. And if you don't fit cleanly into it, you're removed from it. That's when it hits. There is no safety net. There are only conditions, and you didn't meet them. 3. Healthcare becomes triage. You stop thinking in terms of care. You start thinking in terms of what can be ignored. Pain becomes something you evaluate, not treat. Symptoms become something you monitor, not resolve. Every decision is filtered through one question. Can I afford to deal with this? Preventative care disappears first. Then follow-ups. Then anything that isn't immediately critical. And even when something is critical, there's hesitation. Because you know what comes after the visit. Bills that don't care about your situation. Charges that don't change. Systems that don't forgive. So you wait longer than you should. And sometimes, that decision stays with you. 4. Retirement isn't delayed, it's erased. The idea of stopping work becomes abstract. Not postponed. Not pushed back. Removed. You stop calculating retirement timelines and start calculating how long your body can keep up. How long your mind can stay sharp enough. How long you will be able to find a job. How long you can continue to be employable in a system that already sees you as expendable. Savings don't grow, they get used. Slowly at first. Then faster. And eventually, the thought shifts from, when can I retire? To, what happens when I can't work anymore or get hired? And there's no clear answer. 5. Housing becomes temporary, no matter what. Stability in housing dissolves. Ownership becomes fragile, one increase, one repair, one missed payment away from unraveling. Renting becomes unstable, prices shift, availability shrinks, leases become uncertain. So you adapt. Downsize. Relocate. Consolidate. Again. And again. Until home is no longer a fixed place. It's a temporary arrangement. Something that can change at any time for reasons you don't control. And every move costs something: money, time, stability, energy. You don't settle. You circulate. 6. Caregiving breaks the balance. Then the pressure multiplies. A parent declines. Needs increase. Time becomes fragmented. Your attention is divided between survival and responsibility. There's no system to absorb this. No backup care that's affordable. No workplace flexibility that's reliable. No policy that steps in and says, well, cover this. So you stretch. You miss work. Or you work exhausted. You cut hours. Or you risk losing them entirely. And the cost isn't just financial. It's cumulative. Every day adds weight. And nothing removes it. 7. The psychological shift, from stress to survival mode. There's a point where this stops feeling like stress. Stress assumes relief at some point. This doesn't. This becomes baseline. You stop expecting things to improve. You stop planning long-term. You stop thinking in years and start thinking in weeks. Then days. Decisions become immediate. What gets paid now? What gets delayed? What gets ignored? You're not building a life anymore. You're managing continuity. Keeping things from falling apart for one more day. Then the next. Then the next. 8. Systems continue, but not for you. From the outside, everything still looks functional. Stores are open. Businesses operate. Systems still exist. But access becomes selective. The systems didn't disappear. They narrowed. They still work for those who fit. Stable income. Continuous employment. Clean records in the system. For everyone else, the doors don't slam shut, they just don't open. And that distinction matters. Because it creates the illusion that everything is still intact, when in reality, it's just no longer accessible. 9. The divide becomes permanent. At a certain point, the separation stops being temporary and hardens into something permanent. Early on, it still feels like people can recover, lose a job, find another, fall behind, catch up, struggle, then stabilize. But over time, that pattern breaks. The system no longer cycles people back in once they fall out. It continues forward without them. And that's where the real shift happens. Because now the difference between those who are stable and those who aren't isn't just about effort or decisions, it's about timing, positioning, and whether you manage to stay inside a system that no longer allows easy re-entry. Those who maintain consistent employment, who avoided big disruptions, who stayed within the acceptable structure, they continue, even if it's strained. But those who slipped, even once, find themselves locked out of the same pathways they used to rely on. Not because they stopped trying, but because the system doesn't reset anymore. It doesn't forgive gaps. It doesn't rebuild ladders. It moves forward and leaves gaps behind it. And once you're in that gap, you're not climbing back, you're adapting to a completely different reality outside of it, where everything costs more, takes longer, and offers less in return. That's when it stops feeling like a rough period and starts feeling like a line has been crossed, one that doesn't reverse. 10. Aging without a system. While everything else becomes unstable, one thing continues without interruption: time. And time changes the equation whether the system acknowledges it or not. Energy doesn't reset the same way. Recovery takes longer. Small issues become persistent ones. The physical and mental endurance that carried you through earlier decades starts to shift, gradually but noticeably. But the system you're operating in doesn't change alongside that reality. It doesn't reduce expectations. It doesn't create space. It doesn't recognize that the same output now requires more effort than it used to. Instead, it continues to demand consistency in a structure that is becoming harder to sustain. So you adapt again, not because it's sustainable, but because there is no alternative built in. You work through fatigue. You ignore warning signs. You push past limits because stopping isn't supported in any meaningful way. And the longer this continues, the more the gap widens between what is required and what is realistically possible. This is what aging looks like when there is no system designed to support it, just a continuous expectation to keep functioning at a level that no longer matches the reality of your body or your circumstances. 11. The final compression. By the time everything converges, what's left isn't collapse, it's compression. Life doesn't fall apart all at once, it tightens. Options narrow. Flexibility disappears. The space you used to have to get used to the situation, recover, or make mistakes gets smaller and smaller until it's almost gone. Decisions that once had room for correction now carry immediate consequences. There's no buffer, no margin, no extra capacity to absorb anything unexpected. Every move becomes calculated because it has to be. Every expense, every choice, every shift in direction is weighed against what little stability remains. And as that space continues to shrink, life starts to feel less like something you're building and more like something you're managing within strict limits. Not expanding, containing. Not progressing, maintaining. You're no longer navigating a wide path with options on either side. You're moving through a narrowing corridor where the walls keep closing in, and there are no side exits left to take. And the further you go, the clearer it becomes that this isn't temporary pressure, it's the structure itself, tightening around you with no indication that it will loosen. 12. Nothing catches you. This is where everything finally stops being theoretical and becomes unavoidable. Not one issue, not one system, not one failure point, but the combined weight of all of them pressing down at the same time. The job market no longer provides stability, the safety net no longer guarantees support, healthcare is no longer accessible without risk, and retirement is no longer a defined outcome. Each one of these on its own would be difficult. Together, they form something much harder to navigate, a reality where there is no clear place to recover once something goes wrong. What makes this different from anything earlier in life is the absence of a reset. There was always a time when setbacks could be absorbed, when starting over was difficult but possible, when time itself created space to rebuild. That space is gone. The margin that once allowed recovery has narrowed to the point where even small disruptions carry long-term consequences. A lost job is no longer temporary. A health issue is no longer contained. A financial setback is no longer something you can outpace with time. Everything lingers, and everything compounds. And when systems stop holding, there is supposed to be something underneath them. That has always been the assumption. That when institutions fall short, something closer, something more personal, fills the gap. But that structure is no longer consistent. The expectation to stand on your own has remained, but the expectation of mutual support has not kept pace with it. What used to function as a buffer is now uncertain, uneven, and in many cases, unavailable when it's needed most. So when pressure builds, there is no secondary layer to absorb it. That is the shift that defines this moment. Not just instability, but exposure. You are expected to continue operating inside systems that no longer guarantee stability, while also managing the absence of anything reliable outside of them. The responsibility remains fully in place, but the structures that once balanced that responsibility have thinned out or disappeared. And that changes the entire equation, because it removes the assumption that something will be there if things go wrong. So the question at this point is no longer about effort, or preparation, or whether the right decisions were made along the way. It comes down to endurance within a structure that no longer adjusts to support you. How long can stability be maintained when every layer that once reinforced it is under pressure? How long can forward movement continue when the path itself keeps narrowing? Because when everything is stripped back, when the systems weaken, when the expectations remain, and when the fallback options are no longer dependable, what's left is a reality that is difficult to avoid and even harder to soften. There is no guaranteed recovery point. There is no automatic support. And increasingly, nothing catches you. 13. The family breakdown, the one-way support trap. Generation X didn't just inherit a broken system, they inherited a broken model of support. A lot of you were raised under a hard line. Once you're 18, you're on your own. No transition period. No safety cushion. No structured handoff into adulthood. You were expected to figure it out fast. Work, bills, responsibility. Independence wasn't gradual, it was immediate. But here's the contradiction that followed you into adulthood. Even though you were cut loose early, you were still expected to be there for them. When parents aged, needed help, needed time, needed support, there was no question. You stepped in. You changed your life. You carried responsibility that was never fully modeled or balanced. So what formed wasn't a support system. It was a one-direction expectation. Upward. And now, decades later, that pattern didn't reset, it got worse. Because the next generation didn't grow up with the same rules. They grew up in a different structure, a different mindset, a different definition of what family support even means. In many cases, the message shifted into something almost opposite. Parents help children. Children do not help parents. And if that line is crossed, if a parent needs support, asks for help, or even leans slightly, it's not seen as normal. It's seen as failure. As weakness. As bad parenting. So now Generation X is sitting in the middle of two completely different expectations. Raised to be independent early. Expected to give support upward and downward. But unable to receive support downward. Or upward. That's not balance. That's a trap. And when the system outside the family starts failing, jobs, healthcare, stability, you would expect the family unit to compensate. Historically, it did. That was the fallback. But now, that fallback is fractured. Because support inside the family is no longer mutual, it's conditional, directional, and often absent altogether. You don't ask for help because you were taught not to. And you were told no too many times before. So even if you do, you're not sure it will be given. So when everything else tightens, when the job market shrinks, when benefits disappear, when costs spike, Generation X doesn't just face external pressure. You face it without a reliable internal safety net. No system outside. No system inside. Just responsibility going up. And silence coming down. And that leads to a reality most people don't say out loud. Family used to be a buffer against instability. Now, for many, it's no longer structured that way. Not because people don't care, but because expectations changed, roles shifted, and somewhere along the line, support stopped being mutual. This is one of the most overlooked parts of the pressure on Generation X. Not just that the system is failing, but that when it does, there's nowhere left to fall back to. In closing, nothing catches you, not even where it should. This is where everything converges. Not just the job market. Not just healthcare. Not just the safety net. All of it. Because what this has been building toward isn't just external instability, it's total exposure. Generation X is moving into the most critical phase of life at the exact moment when every traditional support structure is either weakening, conditional, or gone entirely. The systems that were supposed to stabilize this stage, career security, accessible healthcare, reliable retirement, public assistance, are no longer dependable. That alone would be enough. But it doesn't stop there. Because when systems fail, there's supposed to be something underneath them. Family. That was always the unspoken backup. The thing that didn't need policy, approval, or qualification. The thing that filled in the gaps when everything else fell short. But for Generation X, even that isn't stable. You were raised to be independent early, sometimes abruptly. No transition, no safety buffer, just a line drawn in adulthood, handle it yourself. And you did. You built your life on that expectation. You learned not to rely, not to ask, not to expect. But at the same time, the expectation to give never went away. As your parents aged, needed help, needed support, you stepped in. No hesitation. No framework. Just responsibility. You add just your life around it because that's what you were taught family meant. Support goes up. Now look at what's below you. A generation raised under different expectations. A different definition of independence. A different understanding of what family obligation even is. And somewhere in that shift, the direction of support didn't reverse. It stopped. Parents are expected to give. Children are not expected to return. And if that line gets crossed, if you need help, if you ask, if you can't hold everything on your own, it's not seen as normal. It's judged. Quietly or directly, the message is the same. You're supposed to handle this. So now the structure looks like this. No stable system above you. No reliable support below you. And responsibility still pulling from every direction. That's not pressure. That's isolation. And this is the part no one wants to say clearly, because once it's said, it can't be softened. If nothing changes, there is no point where everything stabilizes. There is no moment where the system steps in and carries the weight. There is no automatic recovery waiting at the end of the timeline. There is no guaranteed fallback, external or internal. Not from policy. Not from the market. And for many, not even from family. Generation X was told to be independent. And you are. But independence was never supposed to mean absorbing every failure of every system alone. That was never the deal. Now it is. So this is what it comes down to. Not whether you worked hard enough. Not whether you made the right choices. Not whether you followed the rules. But whether you can continue to hold everything together. In a structure that no longer holds you. Because when the systems thin out, When the expectations don't match reality. When support only flows one direction. You're left with one final truth. Nothing catches you. And for the first time, there may not even be anywhere left to fall. Series closing, episodes 1 through 8. This started with a promise. Not directly, but it was always there. Work hard. Be independent. Do the right things. Follow the path. And eventually, it would come together. Stability. Security. A life that made sense after all the effort you put into it. That was the foundation. Episode by episode, that foundation was tested. You were told you could be anything, but the path wasn't equal. You were raised to take care of yourself, but left to figure it out too early. You climbed a ladder that started disappearing beneath you. You were pushed toward college that didn't guarantee anything. You became the generation squeezed from both directions. You watched the safety net thin, strand by strand. You felt the pressure build without relief. And now, here at the end, you see what all of that was leading to. This isn't one broken piece. It's a pattern. Every step along the way removed something. Certainty. Stability. Support. Time. Margin. Not all at once, but enough. Over time. That now you're standing in a system that expects everything from you. And guarantees almost nothing in return. And the hardest part isn't just what's missing. It's what remained expected. You were still supposed to adapt. Still supposed to work. Still supposed to hold everything together. Still supposed to not need help. Even when help itself became harder to find. That's what this entire series has been showing. Not failure. Not weakness. Not bad decisions. But a shift in the structure itself. A system that changed while you were inside of it. And now you're here. Not at the end of your story, but at the point where the reality is clear. There is no version of this where things go back to how they were. There is no moment where everything resets and becomes predictable again. There is no guarantee that the systems you were told to rely on will hold. But there is one thing that has been consistent through all of it. You adapted. Every time something shifted, you adjusted. Every time something broke, you worked around it. Every time something disappeared, you found another way forward. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. So this isn't an ending built on false hope. And it's not built on defeat either. It's built on clarity. Clear about what changed. Clear about what's gone. Clear about what's still expected. Because once you see it clearly, you stop waiting for it to fix itself. You stop expecting it to catch you. You stop assuming there's something underneath you if things go wrong. And that changes how you move forward. This has been the things that bother me. If this hit you, if you've lived this, seen this, or felt this building, make sure you like, comment, and share it so it reaches someone else who's standing in the same place and hasn't put it into words yet. And if you want more of this, real, direct, no filter, subscribe. Because this may be the end of this series. But it's not the end of what needs to be said.